Ago Midasi. Greetings, welcome, Aquaba. Hope that everybody is, of course, maintaining your absolute highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health today on this Sunday. And as always, we want you to know that we are extremely glad and excited that you have decided to spend this hour with us today here at our Ancestors' Voices for this 8/29/21 edition, Huey P. Newton's Murder and COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence Program. We are glad that you're here. And we start, as we always do, by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere whose land we tread on here. Every step that we take is immersed in the blood of the indigenous people. So if you want to do something about that, you can start by refusing to call yourself an American, because if you do that in any way, form, I don't care what you hyphenate in front of it, what you're doing is diminishing the fact that this is stolen land and the people who it was stolen from. That's the first thing. There's a whole lot of stuff that needs to be done to correct that problem, but that's the first thing we can start. So that's our recommendation there. Respect to the indigenous people and their rightful and just fight to reclaim their stolen lands, which they will be successful in achieving. And also, along with that, we give honor and respect to our African ancestors, of which Huey P. Newton is obviously one. And there are millions others. They are the reason that we are here today. I am in the middle of reading a book I picked up a week ago, Robert Paris Moses, A Life in Civil Rights and Leadership at the Crossroads by Laura Visser Mason. And if you don't know who Robert Moses or Bob Moses is or was, he was a early organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and was really an essential person in charting their program of nonviolent resistance in the Deep South in the early 1960s. And he actually just made his physical transition just a few weeks ago. He is the founder of the Algebra Project, where he spent the last 30, 40 years teaching inner city African youth and indigenous youth how to do algebra before his passing. So we honor our ancestors. They are the reason that we are here. They're the cause for our being able to exist and speak as we do today. So we are happy to be able to represent and do our absolute best to honor their legacy. And this topic today, again, like all of them, but very important. A lot of people know the name Huey P. Newton. People know he was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland, California in October 1966. Most people know that he was the chief and primary ideologue for the Black Panther Party. It was his encounter with Oakland police officer Jim Frey on August 28th, 1967, in which Frey was killed, his partner Haynes was injured, and Huey P. Newton was injured, that really set the stage to propel the Black Panther Party into the national spotlight. He was arrested, put in jail, and the Free Huey movement really capitulated the Black Panther Party into international consciousness. Everybody has seen the picture of Huey P. Newton in the rattan chair with the spear and the rifle that was used to publicize his legal fight to get out of jail. So a lot of people also know his, delving in the latter years of his life, his drug use, his abuse, and all of those things that certainly happened, and we're certainly unfortunate that they did happen. But the point of today's session is to illustrate how his failings were not the reason why he was killed on August 22nd, 1989, but simply they were used as cover by the US government to kill him. And we're going to talk about why. So we're glad that you're here with us to do that today. We appreciate you, and we will get right into it. As we always do, we just will do our quick introductions. My name is Ajamu, and I'm an organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which of course sponsors our ancestors' voices. And with me is my daughter, Shakura, who is also an organizer with the APRP and is a student studying to become the first doctor in this family, which she will achieve if she's on schedule next year. So we're excited, but even if she hadn't even graduated high school, I would be just as honored to share this space with her because she's a dedicated soldier, committed to justice, passionate. I don't know where she got that from, but a really good person. And those are the things that matter, at least to us. So just honored to share this space with her. And the objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you all, is Pan-Africanism. We believe Pan-Africanism, or one unified socialist Africa, is our solution. We believe that until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth can ever have expectations of being free. You will never have respect and dignity as long as your mother is disrespected and isn't afforded dignity. So that's where our movement is taking us. And we have a number of years of work, and we're continuing to build on that work. We're based in Africa to bring about that objective. And we have chapters everywhere around the world and relationships with other liberation movements who are also fighting against the same enemies that we fight against, the international capitalist and imperialist network. So thank you for joining us again for the murder of Huey P. Newton and what COINTELPRO, or the US government, had to do in facilitating that murder. And so to get us started, to give us some framework on the history, I'm going to turn it over gracefully and humbly to Shakura.
Thank you so much, Daddy. That was funny when you said, if the schedule is on point next year, yes, hopefully, yes. Greetings, family. We hope that you are in good spirits and hanging in there. If any of you are located in the plantation in Louisiana, we are especially lifting you up and thinking of you. We hope that you all are safe, healthy, and well, mentally, physically, spiritually, in any capacity. And again, if you are in danger currently because of natural disasters or humanistic disasters, we hope that you are finding a way to stay safe, to stay sane, and hopefully finding the motivation to organize, because without that key, the oppression will continue. So I'm super humbled to talk today about Huey P. Newton. I definitely have benefited from the sacrifices of this human being, and you have too, whether you know it or not. So I look forward to walking us down how this person came to be. So Huey P. Newton's family moved from Monroe, Louisiana, United States, to Oakland, California, US, where Huey grew up. While befriending Bobby Seale at Merritt College, Huey developed several ideas for how to make a splash upon society. While building upon he and Seale's participation within the Soul Students Advisory at Merritt, Newton, influenced by Oakland activist Mark Comfort, who had participated in supporting the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's SNCC Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or the original Black Panther Party in Alabama in 1965, talked Seale into joining him in initiating the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in October 1966. Solidified with an initial membership of Huey, Bobby, 16-year-old little Bobby Hutton, the Fort brothers, and big man Elbert Howard, the Panthers were born with Bobby as their initial chairperson and Huey as the Minister of Defense. Little Bobby was the treasurer. The Panthers' armed patrols against police terrorism against the African community brought them widespread attention. And when the white power structure moved to disarm them with legislation from racist Senator Don Mulford and the full support of the racist National Rifle Association in 1967, a law was passed making open carry of firearms illegal in California. The Panthers, mobilizing to protest this racist bill, marched 29 armed Panthers and supporters into the California State Capitol building on May 2nd, 1967. 29 armed Panthers. Are you all picturing that? Because I am. And as I said before, this organization's sacrifices are the reason that we are standing here today. Marched into the state capitol on May 2nd, and subsequent in international publicity and the Panthers' eventual community programs that endeared them to the African masses made the Panthers public enemy number one in the eyes of the federal law enforcement agencies. Next slide, please. In early 1968, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, launched its latest and many versions of counterintelligence programs aimed at social justice organizations. This particularly vile version focused on neutralizing African liberation organizations. So again, the counterintelligence program, their full initiative was to disarm, disable, dismantle organizations that promoted why Africans should be organized. And I think it's really important that we simmer on that and just remember that that was the objective of why this sub characteristic of the FBI, or sub umbrella, if you will, was created. So they had their hands in dismantling every organization you could think of. Some examples would include the Republic of New Africa, the Nation of Islam, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Revolutionary Action Movement. But the target, the primary target of this campaign was the Black Panther Party. Due to its increased popularity, due to its national programs, I am a benefit of the Black Panther Party, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have an idea of what women identifying health looks like. We wouldn't have an idea about that because they shed light and brought that to the attention. I am also a benefit of the Black Panther Party because without their national program, many public schools still would not be feeding their children every day. So as I just said to you, we both benefit. And if we continue to do more and more research, we'll get a better idea of just how involved Huey was, just how involved Bobby Seale was. And we'll start to understand that they basically needed to be stopped. Why? Because they were making the world a better place by bringing food to starving children. That's why they needed to be stopped. This is the country that we fight for, though, right? This is the country that you all will die for and will beg to protect. You will defend your patriarchy and your patriotism. Same thing, in my opinion, but you will defend that. When I just told you that this organization was literally dismantled for bringing food to starving children, and we are upset about that, we don't want to encourage that. We really need to unpack that, family. We really need to unpack that. So because of their national programs, because of their charismatic leadership and their image and the imprisonment of Huey P. Newton on the death of an Oakland police officer and the international Free Huey movement, all of that was a product of that being the result. The FBI did its homework, though. So this is why we have to continue to organize in spaces where we are secure and we are secrete, and that we are not necessarily just opening up for our laundry to be aired to everyone. By late 1968, they produced a study that indicated that although at its highest, the Panthers had a membership of 800 to a couple of thousand core members. The part that greatly concerned them is that an estimated 48% of Africans 25 and under supported the Panthers. This revelation kicked the FBI's program, now called COINTELPRO, for counterintelligence program, into high gear. The Panthers' most effective leaders, such as Fred Hampton in Chicago, Bunchy Carter and Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt in Los Angeles, and of course, Huey P. Newton, were targeted for discrediting and death. Hundreds of internal police informants were unleashed inside of the Panther Party, and distrust and dangerous antagonisms were exacerbated to ensure dysfunction became the dominant inside the party. So we have to continue to follow our instincts, family. Yes, we want to organize with other like-minded oppressed people, but we also need to be aware that these systems that are in place, the CIA, the FBI, I remember a chant growing up when I would go to ALD every year, the FBI and the CIA ain't nothing but the KKK. So we have to continue to remember that we do want to organize with other like-minded people, but not everybody wants to be organized. Some people want to stay on the plantation. Some people enjoy their cable on the plantation and their TikTok and their YouTube videos, and they don't want to be free, and they don't want you to be free. So, the unspoken story about Harriet Tubman freeing some of the slaves is that she had to shoot some of them slaves because they were willing to jeopardize the rest of the group because they begged to go back to the plantation. They couldn't fathom the idea that they actually had freedom at their fingertips because they didn't want to leave the master. And so she had to pull her gun out and be like, listen, are you with us, or do I need to put you out of your misery? Because you're not going to ruin this for the rest of us. We've come too far. And so we have to just be very clear about that, family. And that's going to be really challenging for some of us because some of us trust more easily than others. And some of us are not willing to make those really hard decisions. But if it comes down to getting in the way of the masses being free, we're going to have to do, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary, because not all of us want to be free. And I think that that's a very hard reality, but majority of us understand that that's the only alternative. Otherwise, what's the point of living? Because we're already not in a space where we're comfortable as we speak. So let's continue to join organizations that are working for justice. Let's watch one another and be mindful of what's going on. Let's build community defense programs, and let's look out for one another and be mindful of people who are being suspicious. Be mindful of people who don't have the well-being of the greater large masses of people at heart. Be mindful of that and call that out when you see it. Call it out when you see it, because usually bullies and people that can't be trusted, they don't like to draw a lot of attention. So call that out, because we can't let anything get in the way of us organizing and being free. You all take care and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakura. Thank you very much for that. And I just want to pick up on one thing that you said that I think is very important about this topic in particular. And that is that, we have to remember that we're not saying today or making any excuses for Huey P. Newton or anybody else's bad behavior. I mean, if you have studied anything about the work we do, you know that I myself have written extensively about Huey P. Newton's contradictions. So if you're confused about that, you just haven't done your homework. What our point is today is that there's always going to be personal contradictions. That's a part of our pathway to develop as human beings. And this backward criminal government will always be trying to find a way to take advantage of those contradictions in order to weaken our struggles for forward progress. So that's just important to make that point, because we're not in any way, we don't in any way condone any of the negative things that Huey was involved in, particularly throughout the 1970s. And we've said many times that all of the strugglers in the Black Panther Party, if you read what they said about it, have articulated, I think, in very clear terms, the contradictions within the party and what needed to be done to address those. And I'll even go farther to say that Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, who was, of course, the prime minister for the Black Panther Party, after being the chairperson for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of his main contributions to the All-African People's Revolutionary Party was the necessity of organized political education. And if you look at videos of him speaking and study his history, he was very clear that his primary motivation for focusing on this was because the Black Panther Party did not have it. And because it did not have it, it made it highly susceptible to sabotage by external forces that were working against our people and working against justice. And that the solution for that was to make sure that you had a highly trained, highly educated cadre who were dedicated to the struggle and couldn't be co-opted and couldn't be turned around. So that's the reason why, as Shakur said, we benefit from the Black Panther Party. I'm not saying this to point out any weaknesses in the Black Panther Party. The fact that I've spent 37 years in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's political education program, and that I can put together material like this in a few minutes every week. Because of that process, I give tribute to the Black Panther Party, because it was because of their experience that we were able to figure some things out so that we could correct them. So this is just, again, important to note. And I want to talk a little bit in terms of analyzing what happened to Huey P. Newton, his final years, because a lot of the propaganda about Huey P. Newton, we know the negative stuff. We know that he clearly had a problem with drugs. We know with cocaine, maybe even some other drugs in the 70s, and we'll talk a little later about where that came from. We also know that there was the troubling charge against him of beating a 17-year-old sex worker in Oakland in the mid-70s, beating a tailor, having a tailor beaten up. And there's documented instances that are just unacceptable. The book by Flores Forbes, who was a Black Panther in the 70s and was really a part of the hit squad that Huey P. Newton organized. They broke into a woman's house trying to get at an enemy or a person they perceived as an enemy who wouldn't cooperate with their program. And they actually broke into the wrong house and ended up shooting an elderly woman who wasn't even the target that they intended. And so, as we said, a lot of what Huey was involved in those latter years was just unacceptable behavior. But there's a lot of talk about that. The FBI has made sure that that he engaged in dysfunctional behavior. That these things happen. But what isn't much of a topic are the things that Huey was doing in the latter years of his life that really let us know that even though he was engaging in all this dysfunction, he never really closed the door on radical political activism. He was no Eldridge Cleaver. He was not someone who became a born-again Christian and denounced the struggle for revolutionary socialism, or he never did any of that. And the reason why that's important to point out, you all, is that this system, when you engage in the type of creative and significant struggle that Huey P. Newton did, the concept that I remember when I was a child, my father was hospitalized. I was 12 years old. I'll never forget. And one of his friends brought over some Playboy magazines. So I had Playboy magazines that were accessible to me in the house. Nobody was paying attention. So I grabbed one of them to look through it. Of course, I wanted to look at the pictures, but I did notice an article in the magazine. This was 1974. And there was a picture of Huey Newton. I'd heard the name because I grew up in San Francisco. You could not grow up in the Bay Area in the 70s and not hear the name Huey P. Newton. So I knew the name, and I'd seen the picture of him sitting in the chair with the spear and the shotgun, but I didn't know much beyond that. So they had that picture, and there was an article, and the title of the article in the Playboy magazine was "Why Blacks Aren't Scary Anymore." Why Blacks aren't scary anymore. Now, it's important to say that we were never scary. That's a lie of capitalism designed to make you think that, if you slap the you-know-what out of us in Mississippi or Alabama, we would just turn the other cheek and pray. And that was never the dominant. I mean, anybody knows anything about the Southern US knows that that's not true. Like, Africans have guns in the South, more so than they do in any other part of this backward society. So that's a whole different seminar topic. But the point for today is that that article spurred me to read it, even though I was only 12 years old. And what the article was saying was that the example the Black Panther Party gave of following police around, getting out of the cars with loaded guns, because again, as Shakur explained, at that time, it was legal here in California to openly carry weapons. And challenging the police with Huey P. Newton's law knowledge, you know, when they would pull over people, telling people, you don't have to answer that. You don't have to do this. You have these options, and talking against the police. And then when the police would challenge them, standing up to the police, like that was a phenomenal example for our people to see. African people with guns standing up against the police. That would be something to see today. So that particular model is etched in the consciousness of African people every day. And although we do nothing to dismiss Huey P. Newton's bad behavior, but we do have to point out that that's not the reason. A lot of people have bad behavior. You know, a lot of people probably listen to this have worse behavior than what Huey was involved in. But one thing we know is that that's not the reason we know who he is. The reason we know who he is because of the things I just described. So we can acknowledge, and again, you know, please don't spread confusion. If you do your homework, you can see I've written extensively about these contradictions. So we always say the same thing. We can acknowledge his contradictions while also honoring his contributions. And so these contributions, we're going to talk a little bit about what those look like in his final years, because again, we don't talk a lot about those, because I think that in a lot of ways spelled his death note by the US government. So the first thing we want to look at in relationship to that was in 1968, during the huge Free Huey Newton rally, and a lot of people have seen that, it's on YouTube, the video's on YouTube. And what happened is that they had a rally. Eldridge Cleaver was the chief organizer for it, one of them, and it was at the Kaiser Center in Oakland, and thousands of people came out. And that's when they announced the alleged merger between SNCC and the Black Panther Party, where Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael then, and James Foreman, and Jamil Abdul-Alameen, who's currently incarcerated, who was H. Rap Brown then, were all SNCC officers who were drafted into the Black Panther Party. There was never actually an actual merger between SNCC and the Panthers, although that would have been great. It just never happened. But that's where they all spoke there, and there was a lot of energy about Free Huey, where they came out of that with Huey's not free, the sky is the limit. And as they were leaving that event, Kwame used to tell us that the police were lined up on the steps, and the police were yelling that they were calling him the N-word, if it takes us 20 years, we're gonna get him. Because again, you know, when a cop gets killed, and it's not clear what happened that night on August 28, 1967, when that cop who incidentally had an extensive record of abuse against the African community. And we have every right to stand up and stop people from abusing us. You don't want to get killed in our community, stop abusing us. So you're tuned into the wrong program if you expect me to express remorse for that murderous Gestapo, because I have none. But we don't know what happened that night. But what we do know for sure is that once one of these Gestapo police are killed, they will never rest until they get retribution against that. Because the police are you want to talk about a gang, that's the best organized gang on the planet Earth. Police everywhere on Earth are the best organized gangs in every society where they exist. And so they will never let someone get away with that. So when they said, we will get him if it takes us 20 years, you better believe they weren't just spouting rhetoric. They have a concerted history of doing this, you all, which we'll talk about at the end. Like, it's not like they're just issuing idle threats. You know, we issue idle threats. These people don't do that. When they say they're going to kill somebody, that's what they intend to do. And they have a strong track record of doing that. So that's the first thing we want to point out, just to make the clear illustration that they had marked this man for murder. No question about that. And they didn't care how long it took. They had every intention of carrying that out. Another thing is the picture on the left is Huey P. Newton's dissertation. because actually, even though, again, this isn't widely talked about, when he died in 1989, he was a doctor. He was Dr. Huey P. Newton. He had achieved his doctorate at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and his dissertation was War Against the Panthers, a study of repression in America. And if you have, it's available now. If you haven't read it, you should read it. You know, I've read countless documented studies on the FBI's counterintelligence program against the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, the American Indian Movement, Revolutionary Action Movement, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Nation of Islam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And none of them are any better than the work that Huey P. Newton did. I mean, his study is an outstanding study on this topic. You should read it if you haven't. It's readily available. You can order it anywhere. You can get it in bookstores. And the point about that is that this is not something that's written by someone who has abandoned the struggle completely, or at least even if some of us think that that's what it is. The point here is that the US government didn't see it that way. They saw it that if he's releasing this type of analysis, this means that he still fundamentally believes the ideological premises that generated the work that he did in the 60s. So that's important. And you should read that work. And once you do that, you'll understand, like, wow, I didn't even know he was thinking like that in 1980. Okay, but that's unquestionably the reality. Another thing that points to Huey Newton's behavior, because, you know, he wasn't really somebody that was doing a bunch of interviews. He did do some interviews. And when he did do them, there was one talk show in the Bay Area that he did just months before he was murdered. And he was on there with a panel discussion talking about racism. And he articulated, you know, a very militant position, essentially saying that until we organize against the system, we're not going to solve racism. And he did that on TV. That's on YouTube. I don't remember the name of the program, but if you go on YouTube and Google Huey P. Newton, it'll come up. And he was on there. He did the Eye on the Prize documentary. He did that just a year before he was killed. So he was involved in a lot of work to frame the struggle in a respected manner. And but then he was also engaged in this drug use. So in 1988, he went back to prison for a parole violation. He went to San Quentin prison. And at that time, Geronimo G. Jaga was incarcerated there for 27 years. He ended up doing. At that time, it was 19 years that Geronimo had done it by 1988. And Geronimo G. Jaga, as Shakur mentioned, was targeted by the FBI. We know this now. I mean, they've had to acknowledge it. They had to pay Geronimo almost a $5 million settlement for wrongful imprisonment in 1997. And he used that money and moved to Tanzania, where he made his transition several years later. But the reason why Geronimo was in prison in the first place was because he was accused of robbing and killing a European woman on a tennis court in Santa Monica in 1968. He didn't do it. The husband of the murder victim identified two other Africans initially. Now, you know, if you know anything about criminal law in this country, once you as a witness identify someone and that's not the person who, you know, and then you change your mind, you don't have any credibility after that. And what should have happened if the situation was legitimate was that the jury should have been notified about that, but they never were. The FBI squelched it, and they actually encouraged the police, the LA police there, to encourage this man to identify Geronimo G. Jaga as a person. So they, you know, the man he initially identified had locked hair. Geronimo G. Jaga is basically bald. So there's no way you could be confused about that. And so they encouraged him to say, no, it was this guy. You really want to, if you think about it, it was really this guy. And so he picked Geronimo. Geronimo was convicted, went to prison for 27 years. The point of telling you all this is that part of the counterintelligence work in the Panthers was to set up Geronimo. And the way they did that was when Huey Newton was in jail initially for the cop that was killed in 1967, the FBI was sending him constant letters saying this person is a police informant. They sent him countless letters saying Geronimo G. Jaga was a police informant. Huey P. Newton didn't know Geronimo G. Jaga at all, because most of the people who joined the Black Panther Party joined after Huey was in jail. So he didn't know most of the people in the party. He didn't really even know Eldridge Cleaver, you know? So after a while, he began to believe these accusations. And so when the charges came against Geronimo, Huey P. Newton ordered all the Panthers not to say anything in Geronimo's defense, even though Huey and several Panthers, Bobby Seale, his brother, David Hilliard, June Hilliard, Emory Douglas, Elaine Brown, all of them were at a meeting with Geronimo at the time when this murder in Santa Monica took place. And so they could have spoken up and said, oh, he was there. He couldn't have been in LA because he was in Oakland. The FBI knew he was in Oakland because they had wiretapped the Panthers' phones. They knew he was there, but they were trying to, again, set him up for imprisonment. And so Huey was part of the reason why Geronimo went to prison for 27 years. And so that's why I'm explaining that to you, because in 1988, when Huey went back to San Quentin for that parole violation and Geronimo was incarcerated there, Huey P. Newton decided he wanted to stage a protest, and he apologized profusely to Geronimo for his role in Geronimo's incarceration while he was there. And then when Huey's time came to leave, he refused to leave. He actually stayed at San Quentin 5 full days after he was eligible to leave in protest of Geronimo being there. He was demanding that Geronimo be released. Now, somebody might look at that and say, well, that's just a crazy man acting, but that's very significant. If you understand the history, that's extremely significant because it painted a picture and it brought attention back to Geronimo's case, which was very important because Geronimo's attorney was Johnny Cochran. And if you go back to the O.J. Simpson trial, when O.J. was acquitted, in the initial press conference after that, Johnny Cochran said, now I can get back to my most important client. And he was talking about Geronimo G. Jaga. So Huey P. Newton's action in 1988, whether you see it as, or anyone else sees it as irrelevant or insane or whatever, our point today is this federal government saw it as alarming. They saw it as an alarming act by somebody who was not ready to let go of their war against the system. And that somebody was a person who all they had to do was say the word and they would have hundreds of thousands of followers. And this was not a we shall overcome person. This was a person that started an organization that was armed and called itself a Marxist-Leninist political party and called for the overthrow. If you look at the Black Panther Party's 10-point platform, one of their points was the overthrow of the capitalist system. That's who this person represented to this United States government. So that's why when he carried out this action in protest of Geronimo G. Jaga being incarcerated, it really raised the spider sense of these reactionary police agencies in this country. And they knew that they weren't intending upon letting this man just walk around the streets, understanding that at any moment he could decide, I want to be a revolutionary again. And up to his death, despite his erratic and dysfunctional behavior, as I mentioned, Newton participated in events all over talking about the struggle. I went to an event at the Uhuru House in 1986, and Huey P. Newton was the keynote speaker there, and he gave a strong analysis about COINTELPRO and how we have to organize to ensure we don't repeat the mistakes in the Black Panther Party so that we can be stronger in fighting for revolution. This was 1986 when he gave this, I was there. So I heard everything he said. It was a very strong presentation in front of close to 1,000 people. So this made this man a problem to the state, you all. I mean, you have to understand that. He might not have seemed like he was a problem to anybody else, but to the state, he was a problem. Still, despite his dysfunctional behavior happening all the time that he was doing all these things that I'm talking about here. And so let's talk about COINTELPRO and Huey P. Newton. Like, what did they do once they realized that, you know, this man was still capable of this type of radicalism and activity? What was their response to that? Well, we know that the FBI completely infiltrated and sabotaged the Black Panther Party and the Black Guerrilla Family, or the BGF, which was founded by Black Panther Party Field Marshal George Jackson, who, if you've been paying attention to Black August events, you should know who George Jackson is. He was incarcerated at Soledad, San Quentin, and other institutions in California since he was a teenager. And he was a leading organizational figure in the California prison system. He was so strong that even the Aryan Brotherhood respected George Jackson. Even the Mexican Mafia, the founder of the Mexican Mafia, Rodolfo Cerdana, respected George Jackson. So he was also, again, a field marshal in the Black Panther Party who idolized, or I don't want to say idolized, but highly respected Huey P. Newton. Okay, and the reason why that's important is because the Black Guerrilla Family is a secretive organization with high military discipline. So people in the Black Guerrilla Family won't even tell you, hey, I'm BG. I grew up with people that were BGF here in California. I knew they were. They knew I knew they were, but they would never acknowledge it because that's what they do structurally. They don't tell you, oh, I'm Black Guerrilla Family. So you don't know who it is, and they're highly disciplined. So, but even in spite of that, they made the unprecedented step after Huey P. Newton's murder of denying any involvement in the murder. And the reason why they did that is because Tyrone Robinson, who was an alleged BGF member, who was the person convicted of shooting and killing Huey P. Newton on August 22nd, 1989 at about 5:30 in the morning on a West Oakland street, because he said Huey P. Newton was robbing him of crack cocaine. He had said that he felt that by killing Newton, he would gain prestige in the BGF because Newton had been ripping off drug dealers on the streets of Oakland for their crack. And the BGF statements that were coming out were saying that's not true. We didn't authorize any hit on Huey P. Newton. And they even went as far as to say that our founder, George Jackson, was a comrade of Huey P. Newton. And even though we had serious problems with Huey P. Newton's behavior on the streets of Oakland in the 1970s, we would never authorize, out of our respect for his contribution to our people's struggle, we would never authorize any type of hit on Huey P. Newton. Now, that's significant to me because, again, the BGF doesn't say anything about anything, ever. But yet they felt the need to make that statement. It's not like if they hadn't made that statement, something was going to happen to them, you know, or something, or their reputation was going to be soiled any more than it already is. It wasn't that. So they had no motivation, no incentive to make that statement. It in no way benefited them to make that statement unless it was true. Unless it was true, you all. That was the only reason they had for making that statement. In no way would they benefit by saying that. Now, the FBI paints the picture of an erratic and violent Newton, and he certainly was erratic and violent in his latter years. But that clearly wasn't the only, like pretty much all of us, he was several people at the same time. And although those were elements of his behavior towards the end of his life, that certainly wasn't the full picture of who he was, as I just illustrated in the last slide. And the other elements of his life, the refusal to denounce the struggle, the active participation in some elements of the struggle, the action at San Quentin prison, and all of those things really concerned the state, as I mentioned. And they were not concerned about Huey P. Newton's behavior, because if you look at the FBI informants who sabotaged the Black Panther Party, their job in infiltrating the Black Panther Party was to cause death, right? George Sams was the direct reason that Alex Rackley was killed. Alex Rackley was innocent. And George Sams, who was the police informant in Connecticut, convinced everybody in that chapter that Alex Rackley was the police informant, and they tortured and killed that 19-year-old brother. And he had done nothing but serve the Black Panther Party vigilantly. William O'Neill, of course, was the man who set up Fred Hampton and Mark Clark for murder in Chicago. I saw the movie. You know, we don't read about anything, but I'm sure we saw Judas and the Black Messiah. So you probably know the name William O'Neill for that reason. Cotton Smith did the same thing in LA with the LA Panthers, sabotage. And so these people, and Cotton Smith played a critical role in antagonizing the differences between the LA Black Panther Party and Maulana Karenga's US organization, which led to the incident at UCLA where Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were murdered. So the FBI wasn't concerned about anybody being violent. That's what they do. They're violent criminals, the FBI. But they were concerned about the potential for Huey P. Newton to get back involved in this struggle. And so just some final thoughts, and this is the critical part of this, because I know some people will hear that and they'll say, yeah, but it's not really, doesn't really say that they killed him. Well, to us it does. And the reason why it does to us is because despite Huey's negative behavior in his latter years, as we stated, the state still had much fear for his potential return to activism. And on some level, and you can pick what it needs to be for you, the state actually played a significant role in Huey P. Newton's deterioration and ultimate destruction. And what we mean by that is, by all accounts, and I'll just refer to the one by Charles Gary, who was the Black Panther Party's attorney, Huey P. Newton was a young, viable, committed, creative, intelligent, fearless leader when he was arrested in August of 1967 at 26 years old, and when he went to jail. And he was in jail, kept in solitary confinement, tortured, and by everybody's accounts, when he got out on August 5th, 1970, he was not the same person. Just like you wouldn't have been the same person, and I wouldn't have been the same person if we had been through that. And then that, because of the Hollywood status of the Black Panther Party, it gave them access to a lot of people with resources, Hollywood actors, you know, people like Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland, Marlon Brando. They were spending time around the Black Panther Party. Marlon Brando paid for the funeral of little Bobby Hutton when the Oakland police killed him on April 6, 1968, 2 days after Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. Marlon Brando paid for that funeral. So this brought in the drugs. And at the time that Huey P. Newton was released from prison, and a lot of Panthers have written about this in their books, you should read it and study what Assata Shakur and Bobby Seale and Kwame Ture and David Hilliard and all of these, Elaine Brown, all these people had to say who were directly involved in this. And they talked about how at the time Huey was released, all the other Panther leaders had been either killed or were in prison. And the general feeling among the Black Panther Party was that if we can get Huey out, because for years now they had been free Huey, that had been the primary call of the Black Panther Party. And so the thought process was that if we can get Huey out of jail, all of this dysfunction that's going on, he can fix this. Well, no one person can do that. And Huey P. Newton wasn't even an accomplished public speaker. I mean, that just wasn't his main quality and skill. And so the person that people expected to get out of jail was the person sitting in the rattan chair with the spear and the shotgun, not the actual human being that Huey P. Newton was. And clearly he never felt adequate enough to be that person. And it caused serious internal conflict in that man. And I'm not saying any of that to make any excuses for his erratic and bad behavior. Again, do your research before you comment on what I'm saying now, because we have established that position for years now. For you even, a lot of people even knew who Huey P. Newton was. We established that. So don't bring that nonsense into this discussion. What we're saying right now is that this was not the same man in 1970 that was there in October in 1966. And a lot of that was due to the repression he experienced from the police. The counterintelligence program between 1967 and 1971 had 269 planned actions against the Black Panther Party. And by planned actions, we're talking about things that were designed to discredit people, turn people against people, get people arrested and convicted and incarcerated, and get people killed. And of those 269 actions against the entire African liberation movement, rather, 233 of the 269 were against the Black Panther Party. And the overwhelming majority of those were aimed directly at Huey P. Newton. And so I don't know a human being, alive or dead, who faced with that level of repression would not have a strong potential to buckle. And so not making any excuses for the brother, but just saying that that's what happened. That's what happened. And it would have happened to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And it's unfortunate. And, you know, I think what's important for us today is to understand that so we can prevent that from happening in the future. And then the response of the masses of people to his legacy reflects an acknowledgement of his contradictions, as I've said multiple times, but also a recognition of his contribution. The thousands of people that came to his funeral in 1989, which I was there, saw it, participated in it. A lot of movement figures came, reflected the love people had then and still have today for the contributions of Huey P. Newton. You all have family members that are far from perfect. All of us are far from perfect. And you still love them, even though you recognize you might even love them and not even trust them, but you still love them. I have relatives like that who have, for years, carried out dysfunctional and harmful behavior against me, and I love them. I've forgiven them because I've done my work, but I wouldn't turn my back on them. So that's what we're saying about Huey P. Newton, that I think the masses of African people get that and understand that about him. But going back to the state killing him, the thing that you have to remember is the capitalist system doesn't recognize retirement. Now, in Huey P. Newton's mind, he might have thought, well, I'm not really engaging in that struggle like I used to. He might have thought that, I don't know. I didn't ask him, and he never commented on it publicly. But based on his actions, it's logical to conclude that he felt like, you know, he would evolve into a different life and walk away from that. But the point that you have to realize is that the state never recognizes that. If you were active in the struggle on that level, at some point to them, you're always having the potential to become active again. And if you want examples of that, look at Comrade Fidel Castro in Cuba. This picture of him, he was close to 90 years old when he made his physical transition in 2016. From 1959 until, according to Cuban security forces, up until his death, the US made efforts to assassinate this man. No question about that. That's documented even by international capitalist dominated entities like the United Nations. That's documented. The San Francisco 8, which the poster on the right reflects, these are people who by the early 2000s had significant others, children, were working capitalist jobs every day, had houses, mortgages, paid rent, had car notes, and were clearly not involved in the African liberation struggle and had not been for 30 plus years. But yet the FBI opened cases of unresolved police killings from the early 70s and targeted these 8 people and arrested them and framed them and had them convicted, even though they knew these people had not committed those crimes. They were just left open on the books. My point is that they will never forgive you when you stand up and fight for justice. They will never forgive you for that. And another example is our sister Assata Shakur. Right now, today, the highest bounty, monetary bounty on a fugitive's head in this country is on Sister Assata Shakur. The federal government is offering a $2 million reward for her capture in Cuba and return to the United States to be reincarcerated after she escaped on November 2nd, 1979. And this woman has been in Cuba since 1984, so going on 40 years. She hasn't been active in the African liberation struggle in this country for almost 40 years. She's in her 70s, and these people have a $2 million bounty on her head today. Go in the post office. Don't take my word for it. It's there. You can see it. So again, they never, never, never forget the people who stand up and fight against them. And they are always going to get revenge on anybody who stands up against them. And they cannot get to Assata, but Huey P. Newton was walking around the streets of Oakland. So he had a target on his back. And our argument is that you can believe whatever the hell you want to believe, but we know that they used his dysfunctions simply as cover to justify killing him. And the Black guerrilla family was just used as a surrogate to do that, because they know that if they accuse them, nobody was going to raise a fuss about that, because people see them as a criminal organization and not somebody that has any credibility. The guy that they accuse of it is not somebody that has any credibility. Nobody would question that. And so who knows what they did, whether somebody got a payoff or what they usually do. But there's no question in our minds that this was a setup and that this man was murdered because he clearly had the potential to re-engage the struggle for justice and liberation. And if you question that, there is absolutely no question in our minds about that. So we will just say that we ask you to let people know about these functions that are designed to educate and provide political education. I'm involved in a number of efforts to initiate political education efforts and community defense projects. We ask you to let people know, because the only way that we can let people know is with your help. So please help us. We appreciate you helping us know, letting more people know. At least get one person you can let know about these regular political education events. So next week here on our Ancestors Voices, Sunday, September 5th, 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, we're going to be talking about what's happening in Afghanistan from a revolutionary Pan-Africanist perspective. So please tell people Afghanistan is all on the news and for all the wrong reasons. And we want to talk about it from some concrete efforts that talk about, what happened in Afghanistan historically, what the role of U.S. imperialism has been there, and what it means for what's happening there today. So please let people know and join us. Go to aprp-intl.org, join the All African People's Revolutionary Party or any organization working for justice. Go to abetterworld.me. While you're there, donate, that would be great. All of these videos you can find there if you want to come back and look at them or tell people about them. So you can do that. Go and read hoodcommunist.org. I'm on the editorial team for that wonderful blog, and we have bi-monthly Telegram events. They kicked us off with Twitter, so now we're on Telegram. Download it free on your smartphone. Every other Thursday, we have these events. We had a wonderful discussion about Afghanistan last Thursday. So this Thursday, we won't be doing it, but a week from this Thursday, we will. So join us there for that. And we have a number of APRP broadcasts like this one, the Pantula broadcast on Mondays, Revolutionary Action African Women last Saturdays, Forward Ever broadcast on Spotify. Our comrades in New Mexico, the weekly newscast Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. And again, I mentioned doing a lot of political education work and community defense. I'm working on projects right now, helping people get community defense projects organized here in Sacramento, in Philadelphia, looking to do some work with some folks in Texas, all over the place based on my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. So I encourage you to continue buying it, using it as the basis, the contents about how we do this organizing work. And just will close by saying that I know there's a lot of things happening. I mean, capitalism is declining, you all. So there's always going to be a lot of things happening. There's unfortunately always going to be a lot of us suffering. That's just what's happening in this system. But I'm eternally optimistic because I know that the man's technology, as Huey P. Newton said, will never match the spirit of the people. And I have faith in humanity. And I know that we can turn this around. I don't care what they say about anything, because if I would have listened to them, I would have been dead years ago. So I don't listen to nothing they say about anything. I know that the spirit of the people can overcome everything. So the message closing to you today is don't let them tell you that there's something wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you other than this backward capitalist system. That's the only thing wrong with you. And if we can get ourselves together and organize to create something better, we can, I don't care if you're addicted to whatever you're addicted to, it's because of this backward system. If you have problems, it's because of this backward system. If you didn't finish school, it's because of this backward system. If you drink, do drugs, it's because of this backward ass system. So don't let them do that to you. Don't let them tell you that. There is nothing wrong with you. The problem is this backward system. We got to change it. So white supremacy has got to go. Patriarchy has got to go. Homophobia has got to go. Capitalism, you already know, has got to go. Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. The Americas belong to the indigenous people. Stay strong. Please tell people about all of these actions we have going on. Stay up. We are winning. Our enemies are never going to tell you that. So we're telling you, we are winning. Stay up, forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.